I'm here to talk about electric vehicles, and we are doing a lot of work with electric vehicles right now. I wanted to talk to you about a case study, but then I started to think there was so much more I wanted to say. So I'll talk to you about our Plugged-in Fleets initiative, that is the project that I'm running on behalf of the Energy Saving Trust, and why we think fleets are so important to the uptake of electric vehicles. But I also wanted to give you a bit of policy background and context as well in terms of why we think electric vehicles are so important in terms of a future technology. Firstly, I want to say that I really enjoyed Graham's presentation and I learned a lot about hydrogen, but I did have to disagree with his point that he made about electric vehicles having already reached a peak and now on a decline. But I think Renault, who are launching 3 electric vehicles, BMW, numerous other mainstream manufacturers who are bringing electric vehicles out over the next couple of years would probably also disagree with that as well. What I should do is just make a little caveat and say when I say electric vehicle, I'm generally probably talking about a plug-in hybrid as well. So I'm talking about plug-in vehicles generally. Why plug-in? And some of these issues have been covered already. Obviously, energy security and the high rising costs of fossil fuel. Just to kind of put it into a sharp context, really. Europe imports 300 billion euros of oil annually, and a third of that is for cars. Since 2000, prices of fuel have risen 5-fold, and we don't really see that that's going to change too much. A diesel vehicle, on average, I pick diesel because that's what most fleets will run. On average, a diesel vehicle probably runs at 13 pence per mile, whereas an electric car would run around 3 pence per mile. So it's actually about a quarter of the price to run an electric vehicle. So there's a very good reasons to move towards plugged-in vehicles. Other 2 issues that we don't think too much about, because I think we focus a lot on electric vehicles and climate change, but one is noise. And what I know living in London is that I can't sleep with my windows open because of the noise, whereas if people were driving electric vehicles, that wouldn't be a problem because they're silent. And air quality. We all know we have massive air quality problems in this country, particularly in urban areas. According to the House of Commons, over 50,000 people die prematurely a year because of air quality, and one of the main problems is petrol and diesel cars and the pollution that comes out of the tailpipe. With electric vehicles, you don't have any tailpipe emissions. So let's have a look at the policy. And the government is backing electric vehicles. I agree with the other speakers. Electric vehicles won't be the only technology that we see moving forward. They're not the only technology of the future. They're just part of a mix, but they're an important part of a mix, and the government agree with that. The government has introduced a number of policies to help the uptake of electric vehicles, and their main driving factor behind that is their climate change targets. And they see that electric vehicles running on renewable fuels will really help us get towards zero carbon emissions. So you're probably all aware that there's a plug-in car and van grant. You can get up to 25% of the cost of an electric car and 20% of an electric van. That's a grant from the government. In terms of how many vehicles are actually eligible for that, right now there are 10 cars available for the grant, eligible for the grant, and there's 7 vans that are eligible as well. There's no road tax, there's no company car tax, unless it's a plug-in hybrid, which is 5%, so that's a reduced rate of company car tax, and there's no congestion charge for electric vehicles. So there are lots of supports and incentives to bring the cost of electric vehicles down and make them attractive to drivers. In terms of how many electric vehicles we expect to see on the road, the Climate Change Committee has a big ambition that they hope to see 1.7 million electric vehicles on the road in 2020. And the Mayor of London, whose house we're in today, he has a very strong ambition as well. He would like to see 100,000 electric vehicles on the road. He actually hasn't said in 2020. I think his aspirations might be sooner than that. But also he wants to see London as the electric vehicle capital of the world. So there's a lot of ambition for electric vehicles in the UK. But at the European level, and I think in some ways this is most important, because the manufacturers obviously don't just sell cars in the UK, they sell them at the international level, and there's a huge driving force coming from Europe. There's legislation where car manufacturers have to bring the emissions down from all vehicles, and electric vehicles is a way for them to do that. And in 2020, they have to, the legislation is getting tighter, and what's on the table at the moment is that every electric vehicle will count as 1.3 vehicles towards their target. So actually there's a strong incentive for manufacturers to be developing electric vehicles to help them meet European targets. And if they don't meet those European targets, then they do face a heavy fine. I was going to say penalty, that's why I said pine. penalty or fine. So infrastructure, one of the main things that come up when you talk about electric vehicles is where will people charge them? One of the main things most people will probably do is charge them at home, because a lot of people, maybe not in London, but a lot of people across the country, especially people who can afford an electric vehicle at the moment, do have a driveway or a garage where they could recharge their electric car. But the government and others are doing a lot to help people make sure that they can charge their electric vehicles if they can't charge them at home or if they want to charge them elsewhere. The Plugged in Places programme is a government-funded programme. They've dedicated £30 million towards 8 pilot programmes across the country, and that's Scotland as well. So all that money is being spent on installing electric recharging points, mostly in public places. Now, the government's carbon plan also has an aim for 8,500 charge points across the country. But it's not just the government that are doing things. Private companies are doing a lot as well. And just one example of that, and there are many others, is the Polar project, which is rolling out a national UK charging point network. And that will be covering over 100 towns and cities. And they expect to do that over 12 months. So it's quite an ambitious project. And that will be public recharging points in places like supermarkets, roadside restaurants on busy roads, and those sorts of things. So electric recharging infrastructure will be easy to get hold of. So let's talk a little bit about plug-in vehicle sales. This is 3 examples of some relatively new vehicles that are on the road. We've got the Ampera, the Vauxhall Ampera here. We've got the Renault Kangoo ZE, and then we've also got the plug-in Prius. Now, this is just 3 examples of the vehicles on the road today, and it's just an example of how many vehicles are coming on the road and that they suit different types of needs, because the 2 on the outside are both range-extended vehicles, so there's not really a range limitation for those. And then obviously the middle one, as you can see, is a van, so that's obviously very useful for businesses. But let's talk about the numbers of vehicles that have actually been sold. Sales have been slower than anticipated. I'm not going to pretend they haven't. What we've seen since the grant came online in January 2011 is 1,994 cars have been sold that were eligible for the grant, and the van grant has only been available for a few months, and since that came live, we've seen 99 vans sold. But I'm still pretty confident about the electric vehicle market, and the reason for that is because we didn't have that many models available. When the grant first came out, you couldn't really buy many electric vehicles. There weren't that many models available. But we're seeing more and more vehicles being launched and more vehicles that suit different types of needs. And I think that's the really important thing. And I'll quote somebody at the Office of Low Emission Vehicles. They said, this isn't a sprint, this is a marathon. So we shouldn't expect to see millions of sales of electric vehicles this year. And we shouldn't think that we've failed if we don't. And just to reiterate the point that there are lots of mainstream manufacturers who are bringing electric vehicles on the roads in the next couple of years. So here's 3 or 4 examples of vehicles we expect to see very soon. We've got the Renault Zoe, which is Renault's 3rd or 4th electric vehicle, you could say, if you include their quadricycle, the Renault Twizy. We've got the BMW i8, which is a very nice car. I don't know if anyone's seen Mission Impossible 3, but if you have seen it, then you'll know that Tom Cruise is driving an i8 in that film. So we're looking at more of these vehicles becoming very aspirational. They've got the BMW i3 as well, and then this is the probably my favourite, the Audi e-tron on the right, and these should be on the roads in the next 2 to 3 years. And just to say a bit more about electric vehicles and costs, one of the barriers at the moment is the upfront cost of an electric vehicle. But there was actually a report that came out this week, and I don't know if anyone's had a chance to look at it, but McKinsey have said that battery improvements will raise capacity by 80 to 110% by 2025. So obviously that will be that's not going to affect the cost necessarily, but it will affect the range. But what will impact the cost and bring the cost down for electric vehicles is that they think that the reduction in cost of the electric battery by 2025 could be as much as 45%. So McKinsey is seeing some really good positive things happening for the electric vehicle market. So now I'll tell you about fleets and why we think fleets are so important. What I should say is, if anyone hasn't read this report, it's the Plugged in Fleets report, and we published that in February. It was a project that was led by the Climate Group, and Energy Saving Trust were involved with that, along with Cenex. And we developed a report that basically made the business case to fleets on why we thought they should invest in electric vehicles. the main conclusion out of that was that, yes, electric vehicles may look expensive when you look at the price, but the most important thing for a business to do is to consider the whole life cost analysis, because the running costs are incredibly low. If you look at service, maintenance and repair, and you look at whether you're in the London congestion zone, how far you drive every day, when you add up everything, you can work out the total whole life cost, total cost of ownership, and what this report states is that for some businesses, in the right cases, electric vehicles can make sense and they're the right choice. And so there's a lot of analysis in this report in terms of what questions businesses should be considering before they buy any vehicle, and they should be doing a cost comparison between petrol, diesel and electric or plug-in hybrid or any of the technologies that are out there to make a really informed decision about which are the best vehicles to reach their, to benefit their business. So why did we decide to focus on fleets? Well, the important thing about fleets is, I don't know if you know this, but in 2011, 58% of all new cars were bought by fleets. 63% of all new vehicles, so that includes vans as well, were bought by fleets. So that's 1.1 million cars and 0.3 million vans were bought last year by fleets. So this is why we think it's so important that businesses understand the benefits of electric vehicles so they make the right decision, but they will be crucial in bringing electric vehicles to the mainstream market. And the other reason we think fleets are so important is because unlike a lot of consumers who will think, when I buy a car, I might not use it more than 50 miles a day, every week, but there might be one time a year when I want to drive to Granny's house. So therefore, I don't want to buy a car that has a restricted range. Whereas a lot of business vehicles, such as delivery vans, will have a set route that they'll do every single day, and they're not going to take it to Granny's house because it's only going to be used for that business. So if you know your range of a vehicle doesn't need to be more than 100 miles, then you can safely invest in an electric vehicle, and the range limitations won't necessarily affect you. And thirdly, fleets are so important is because if you think about computers and mobile phones, they're generally where people first experienced those technologies was in the workplace. And so if people can experience electric vehicles in the workplace, enjoy using them, understand them, trust them, then they're far more likely to invest in them as a personal choice. So very quickly, I'll tell you about our Plugged-in Fleets initiative, which is the program I'm running now. We are working with 20 fleets across the country, and we're working with them to give a tailored review with clear recommendations about why we think those 20 organisations should invest in electric vehicles. If we don't think they should invest in electric vehicles, we would tell them as well. But we're going to do the analysis to make the business case for them where it exists. And the company logos on the right are the companies that we're working with. Boots, Schneider Electric, Morrison's, the Environment Agency are just a few of those. RouteMonkey are one of our partners, and they're bringing scheduling analysis to each of the reviews that we're doing for each of these companies. And we're working in partnership with EDF Energy as well, who are providing the infrastructure review. Because it's really, really important that if we make recommendations about whole life costs and the business case for electric vehicles, that the recharging infrastructure and equipment is factored into that as well. What I should say about that is that we'll be having a final report that will cover all of those 20 reviews that we're conducting and give really clear insight and unique insight into the electric vehicle market and where we think the benefits are, what the challenges are, what the barriers are. And that report will be launched in January. So I ask you all to look out for that. So just to say a few words in conclusion. Firstly, just to reiterate that as the price of oil goes up and battery costs come down, electric vehicles can make more and more sense. Secondly, this really excites me. I don't think I've ever worked on a project before where we've had support from utility companies, energy companies, car manufacturers, the environmental lobby, and governments. If there's someone else can think of another sector where that's happened, then please do tell me, because I really can't think of one. So I think when you've got all those four forces who quite often contradict each other and fight against each other, working together, I really see that electric vehicles will be something really special and something that we'll see on the roads in mass numbers, not too distant future. And thirdly, just to say, as you can see, I think it's a really exciting time. There are exciting vehicle products coming on the market, as I've shown, and if you get a chance, I don't think there's an electric vehicle today, there's a fuel cell electric vehicle out the front, but if there are any electric vehicles, do drive them. And if you haven't had a chance to drive one yet, then I highly recommend you do. Thank you. Oh, brilliant, there's a Mia electric vehicle outside apparently. So okay, thank you.